Good afternoon, and we're back for our postcard from cities. This is a relatively brief conversation on the future of cities and how we decarbonize them. I am Aitor Hernandez Morales, the author of Politico, Europe's Living Cities Global Policy Lab. So welcome to you all. Joining me is Dr. Carlos Moreno, Associate Professor of Science and Scientific Director of the Academic Entrepreneurship Territory Innovation Chair at IEA Paris Panthéon Sorbonne University. Welcome, Dr. Moreno. Can you hear me?
Hello, Aitor. Yes, perfect.
It's lovely to see you.
Hello, thank you for this kind invitation. It's a real pleasure.
It is a pleasure to have you with us. So, Dr. Moreno, we'll get directly into it. We know that cities account for over 70% of global CO2 emissions, most of which come from industrial and motorized transport systems. Now, we have many people who certainly adore their cars, adore their motorcycles, but despite that affection for these machines, when we talk about decarbonizing cities, are we necessarily having a conversation about getting rid of gas-guzzling vehicles and removing those completely from our urban landscapes?
Yes, thank you for this kind invitation. The situation today around the world is very, very clear. We have accepted the unacceptable. For living in cities today, we have in Europe 77% of an urbanized population. We need to change radically our urban lifestyle if we wanted to have the real condition of not only sustainability, but the real condition of livability in the next decade, in the two next decades. For that, we need not only to change our mobility, we need to change our urban lifestyle. We need to reduce our CO2 footprint, but for that, we need to reduce the constraint mobility. I proposed this new paradigm based on a deep exploration of our resources in proximity for reducing our mobilities, reducing our CO2 footprint, reducing our dependency of fossil energies, and to increase the quality of life for having more and more local services with more local resources for each one of all in our cities.
Well, since you mentioned it, you're famous for being the person who popularized the 15-minute city concept, which, as you know,
yes,
has become a hit across Europe. We have cities like Milan, like Paris, incorporating it. And this concept proposes redesigning cities so that people live, work, and have access to all the cities they need within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. So is this vision of hyper-local living the key to decarbonized urban life?
Yes, of course. I proposed just after the COP21 in Paris 6 years ago that we need to change our urban lifestyles for developing more and more local services. I proposed a new model based on 6 essential urban functions for being happy in a city. To have a house with the good conditions, to reduce the long commute for working, to have more access for supplying, to have within a short perimeter for accessing to health, mental and physical, to access in the district to more resources for education, culture, entertainment, and to have more public spaces for people, not for cars, for having air and water non-polluted. This concept is a 50-minute city based on this polycentricity, these new capabilities for fighting against the zoning, for fighting against a fractured, segmented city. This concept is today very popular around the world because we have the possibility for reconciling, on the one hand, a decarbonized world, a decarbonized city, and on the other hand, to continue to develop the more local economy, local employment, and more social interactions for each one in our different districts in the whole city.
Dr. Moreno, I'm sure you have followed the implementation of these plans across Europe, and you've probably followed with some interest the implementation of lower circulation and lower emission zones, which also seek to limit, for example, car access into city centers and so forth. You've probably heard about the pushback that's gotten in certain parts of Brussels lately. What would you say to the people who object to these changes, who initially object to these changes, because they say that it either threatens their individual God-given right to drive a car absolutely everywhere, or they claim that it is somehow interrupting their lifestyle? What would you say to bring them on board to this vision that you have of the decarbonized, more local city?
Yes, we have a vision for transforming our urban lifestyle based on this idea to preserve the common good, for offering more employment, more social interactions, and more local services. In fact, we need to develop a new urban policy, but at the same time, each one of us, we need to change our individual mindset, because for a long time, we have considered that my car is the freedom. And in reality, we need today to consider that the capability for living in a city is the capability for sharing our public spaces, for sharing our local resources, for developing more walkability, for developing more bikeability. And we need to decide for this proximity to transform the public space in order to have this public space more available for local activities, more walkability, more bikeability. We need to develop a new educational process, a new pedagogical process for shifting these habits, for changing, for considering that this is today mandatory if we wanted to survive as civilization at the end of this century. This is not possible to continue to live in the same conditions for the next decade, because this is the next generation that will be in a serious danger.
Finally, sir, I want to ask you which cities you consider models for decarbonization, and looking at those cities, what are the major obstacles that you think are stopping other cities from following their examples?
Today, the more important danger, the more important obstacles, we have three different obstacles. The first one, we need to decide to implement this 50-minute city as a new local policy based on a governance for city, for different metropolises, based on this polycentric way. The second point, we need to discuss with the private sector for transforming, in particular, our work style. We need to develop a more decentralized job. We need to develop more decentralized economical activities. The first point, we need to develop this pedagogical activity for each one of citizen dwellers in order to transform our routines, our daily routines, for commuting differently, for developing more local shoppings, for having more important access to local resources. But this is today a new trajectory. This is not a magic wand. And at the same time, we have a lot of different organizations of mayors. We have the support of UN Habitat, the support of the C40 cities, the most important network of mayors in the big cities, for transforming our cities with the ambitious roadmap. And today, in the European Union, we have launched a very ambitious program for federating a lot of cities, a lot of researchers, and at the same time, stakeholders in the economical activities for implementing concretely this new roadmap in the next years in different places in Europe.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Moreno, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but I want to thank you again so much for your insights. And I'd like to ask our audience to stay put because our next session will begin immediately. And that session is our closing interview with Catherine McKenna, chair of the UN's high-level expert group on net zero emission commitments of non-state entities, quite a mouthful. And she'll be joining my colleague, Carl Matheson, our senior climate correspondent. So stay tuned, and we'll be right with you.